Welcome to Michigan Justice Chronicles with Dan Geherin.
Welcome back to Michigan Justice Chronicles with board-certified criminal attorney Dan Geherin. I'm Lisa Mosbey. Netflix documentary The Crash, examining automobile death cases in Michigan, is the topic of our conversation today. One of the most popular streaming shows out there right now. The Crash discusses a 2022 case out of Ohio in which 3 young people were involved in a deadly auto accident. Dan, a former prosecutor and board-certified criminal trial attorney, have you seen The Crash, and what can you tell us about it?
Well, of course I have, Lisa, and thanks for having me. Yes, my family and I were glued to the TV screen watching The Crash, and everyone in my law firm has been talking about it. It's sort of been, as you said, the hot topic, the chatter of the day. For me, as a former prosecutor, a longtime criminal justice attorney, I can't take those hats off. I watch these through the lens of someone in the criminal justice system. And so I'm critiquing the courtroom actions. I'm critiquing the decisions that were made. And I'm always seeing if there's something that could be learned from it for my own practice. But as you said, for those people that have not seen it, in a nutshell, the case is about a young woman named Mackenzie Shirilla, who was ultimately convicted of homicide following a traffic accident in 2022 in Strongsville, Ohio. And again, in a nutshell, she was driving her boyfriend and a mutual friend in the back seat. And for reasons at the time they didn't know, she went barreling ahead 100 miles per hour down a residential street, smack dab into a building, killing her boyfriend and passenger instantly. And what the police originally thought was a tragic teenage accident soon became a criminal investigation, all culminating, as I said, in charges against Mackenzie. Not only charges, but the most serious, homicide. And even though she was a juvenile under Ohio law, charging her as an adult and securing a conviction and a prison sentence of 15 years to life, where she's still serving as we speak today.
And I have to say, Dan, when you talk about it, my entire body has goosebumps all over. It just raises your skin to think about that. Let's talk about some of the specifics of this. In Michigan, what is considered a juvenile versus adult for criminal justice purposes?
So for many years, Michigan was behind the times, and I complained about it. A lot of practitioners who practice juvenile defense complained about it because Michigan had a 17 and older adult jurisdiction. So you'd have seniors in high school, 17 years old. If they committed crimes, they were treated in the adult system up until October of 2021, so just 5 years ago. Then our governor had the common sense to sign a raise the age law that now complies with most states and says 18 and up is adult jurisdiction in Michigan. And Ohio's the same. When Mackenzie Shirilla committed this offense, she was 17. And so in Ohio, they charged her as an adult, and they had to go through a process convincing a juvenile court or a family court judge that it would be just to have her tried in the adult system versus the juvenile system. I can say in Michigan that's a little different. In Michigan, if you're over the age of 14 and you commit allegedly a felony offense, most felony offenses, our prosecutors can what is called automatically waive a juvenile into adult court. We do not have to get the permission of or the decision from a juvenile court judge. So a little bit of a difference between Ohio and Michigan, but same age, 18 and up is adult, 17 is a juvenile, but under the most serious offenses like she faced, it oftentimes ends up in adult court system.
And I don't think people know that. So thank you for sharing that information. You also mentioned that she was charged with murder. Is that typical with an automobile crash like this?
Great question, and I'm going to say the answer is absolutely not. I mean, you think about all of the fatalities out there, especially amongst young people, prom night accidents and these terrible things where you have inexperienced drivers who are involved in accidents. Most times it's, boy, that's tragic and that's sad, and we move on from it. There may be civil lawsuits and so forth, insurance settlements, but rarely are there criminal charges unless there's drinking or drug use and it's pretty obvious. The case involving Mackenzie was so odd because they eliminated the fact that she was intoxicated or impaired. And then they charge her with murder. That essentially says you intended to do this, you intended to kill your passenger and possibly both passengers. And that's a tough standard, albeit one that they were able to reach. But the issue that you ask about, Lisa, is all about cause, right? If the police determine the cause of an accident is mechanical failure or it's just an act of God or weather, they're not going to charge a crime, let alone homicide. If the police determine that this was an intentional act or such a reckless act that criminal liability must attach, that's when you see criminal charges like homicide coming out of this. But I will say that outside of drinking and drug use, when there's a fatality in an automobile, it is rare to see a homicide case, but if ever there was one, the crash in Mackenzie's case demonstrates why it should be there.
And Dan, what evidence did the police and prosecutor rely on to prove that she was guilty of a crime?
So I would sort of group that into several categories, maybe 4 or 5 categories. The first would be accident reconstruction. Every police department has some officer or officers who are trained in accident reconstruction. They go out and they take measurements and they look for skid marks and they reconstruct what happened. And then they often have someone who they can employ to look at the car to see, was the car malfunctioning? Did the brakes malfunction? And they did both of those analysis in her case and determined that there was nothing wrong with the car and nothing about the accident suggested that she was asleep or passed out or having a medical issue. So that's the first area. The second area is going to be the lovely black box, the event data recorder. Like in airplane crashes, almost every car now, Lisa, has a black box, an event data recorder installed in it. And police are usually easily able to get those boxes either through the driver's consent or through a simple search warrant. And they can see speed, they can see braking. Interestingly enough, in her case, they saw that she was going 100 miles per hour, no brake, no attempts to stop the car for upwards of about 17 seconds. And they saw that someone sort of grabbed at the gear shift trying to potentially stop it, which made it look like maybe the boyfriend saw what was happening and was trying to stop that car. Then you have old-fashioned police work, surveillance tape from video, businesses and homes in the area showing her driving, text and social media, seeing if people were using drugs, alcohol, seeing where their whereabouts were. And probably the most controversial and interesting in her case, they looked at her relationship with her boyfriend. And they saw a lot of toxic, they saw a lot of jealousy, they saw a lot of past threats. And what they were doing there is building the motive to say, okay, a 17-year-old girl's not likely to run a car 100 miles per hour into a wall unless she has a motive and wants to kill her boyfriend. And while they may not have been able to prove that, they certainly painted a picture of someone who was not very likable, someone who did not have a good character, and a lot of toxicity in the relationship. And that made it much easier for a judge to say, you are guilty, young lady.
Dan, was this a jury that found her guilty?
Very good question. Judge. And that's when I talked about earlier, putting my lens on and watching it through my lens. If I were to second guess anything, and I don't know the attorneys in Ohio that did this case, I think they made an enormous strategic error. They decided then to have one judge make the decision. In Michigan, interestingly enough, it requires both sides. The prosecutor and the defendant have to agree to waive a jury, to have a judge decide a trial. And so if one side doesn't like the judge, thinks the judge is too liberal or too conservative, you don't see a lot of judge trials. And in a case of this magnitude, homicide, the age issues, some of that evidence I talked about before, I think it was fool's gold to go after a bench trial unless you know that that judge is very progressive and very liberal. And it turned out that that was the wrong decision because the judge did not like the defendant clearly and convicted her. I'm not here to say a jury would have been different, but when you get 12 people's opinion versus one, that to me is better odds and was an interesting and, in my view, poor strategy choice on her attorney's part.
Sure. Dan, you had mentioned her sentencing. How would that compare to Michigan?
Probably pretty similar, although we may have gotten there in a different way. So in Michigan, if you are convicted of murder in the first degree, it is automatic life in prison. But this was not murder in the first degree. That's premeditated first-degree murder. In all other cases, murder in the second degree is punishable by up to life in prison, and the judge has to set a minimum sentence. And to do so, Michigan has what are called sentence guidelines, these mathematical formulas plugging in someone's record or lack of record and other background pieces of information. I'm not sure Ohio has that. They could have given her either 15 to life or 30 to life, and they elected 15, the lower number. but that's just the starting point. She still has to be paroled by the parole board. With all of the attention her case is getting, she may not be paroled. But if you are convicted as an adult for second-degree murder and you're 17 years old and you've killed 2 people in Michigan, I'm going to guess here it probably would have been similar, maybe a little bit higher on the minimum end.
And in your firm, how often do you represent people in automobile death cases?
Far too frequently, unfortunately, Lisa, right? I mean, if you look at our logo that is all over our website and everything we do, there are 3 words up there: criminal, injury, and license. And that encapsulates everything we do here. And if you can imagine, an automobile death hits all of those boxes, right? So we defend people like Mackenzie who are charged with causing the death of others, whether as a juvenile or adult. We do a lot of juvenile work in this firm. Many firms do not. Secondly, when people lose their licenses due to a fatality, even due to a mechanical issue or an act of God or a patch of ice, we often have to petition to get their driver's license reinstated. We do a lot of that. And lastly, we often bring civil suits, wrongful death suits, or serious injury suits on behalf of our clients who are, say, killed or injured due to the distracted nature of another driver, the criminal negligence of another driver. So had I represented the families of those 2 young men in the car, we would have gone after the young woman, her family, her insurance company. But had I represented Mackenzie, we would have tried to fight the juvenile to adult designation, certainly would have tried to go to a jury trial, and may have ended up in the same point. But to answer your question, sadly and regrettably, I'm in a busy town here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. A lot of pedestrians, a lot of accidents, a lot of car traffic, and a lot of automobile deaths that cross our desks on a daily basis.
Dan, I just want to take a second to thank you for walking through this film with us and explaining the nuances of what happened in this case. Thank you so much.
Very intrigued by it as well. And Lisa, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for this installment of Michigan Justice Chronicles with board-certified criminal trial attorney Dan Geherin. For more information to connect with Dan and his team, visit glgmichigan.com. And before you go, feel free to like, subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode. I'm Lisa Mosbey, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.